and welcome to today's session on the circular economy and emerging technologies. I would like to welcome everyone to this is the fourth session of the Circular Economy Learning Series, and is focused on emerging technologies, a topic very close to my heart. We now have well over 1,000 registered participants in the series that look to explore the role of private sector in competitive sectors, scaling up the transition to a circular economy across key industries and markets, such as digital businesses, industrial zones, manufacturing, tourism, among others. We thank the support to our partners, the CIIP, SMAP, and the Korean World Bank Group Partnership Facility. And in this fourth session, we will explore the role of emerging technologies as enablers of the circular economy, as well as policy and regulatory measures and economic incentives to support this transition, and also leverage in the context of COVID-19 recovery as a transformative strategy on how policymakers can pave the way towards such a future. Today, we have an excellent lineup of speakers from both the private sector and the public sector who will be reflecting on these topics. Just to highlight that for this to work, we will need close cooperation among both the public and private sectors. I'm very happy to have participation on both. Emerging technologies and their convergence are having transformational effects across global value chains. These ranges of innovations across the digital, physical, and biological technologies play a crucial role in enabling circular business models by increasing the efficiencies and reducing wastage, increasing information transparency, enabling to move away traditional business materials designed for a linear system and really making it in a way that can be reused and remanufactured, driving innovation by allowing new entrants into the markets. And now that's even more important in the context of COVID recovery. Among the many examples of technology applications being used across the circular value chain, we are seeing big data and artificial intelligence for redesigning manufacturing processes to be more efficient and flexible using insights from analytics. Digital sharing economy platforms offering products as a service for urban mobility, home and rental sharing. The IoT and Internet of Things, which enables new marketplaces for connecting buyers and sellers of manufacturing services, raw materials, and products toward building global supply chains. Bio-based materials supplying new forms of sustainable packing, and bioenergy as a means to reuse problematic materials that have lower market value. The use of digital technologies and digitalization will not automatically lead to greater sustainability nor greater competitiveness. There are associated risks and rebound effects to be considered, and we need to be balancing the trade-off of both. However, if adequately designed and steered, then data, digitally enabled solutions, and Industry 4.0 could certainly boost the transition to a circular economy. Measures will need to be aligned with climate action and the wider sustainability agenda, and naturally be supported by single market tools, the industrial policy agenda, research and development, and social and, of course, competition and consumer policy. I'm also today and this becomes very timely, because I'm really pleased to announce today the call for competitive proposal for the disruptive technologies for development, what we call in the bank DT4D 2.0 challenge, that awards grants and support to pilot disruptive technology solutions in World Bank Group projects. I wanted to indicate this today, I think, because maybe through the conversations today, we will have great ideas on how to do that, and encourage bank colleagues to actually look into this challenge to see how we can really, in practice, operationalize the use of emerging technologies, taking both into account, the opportunities and the risk, and then to actually look at the impactful solutions for our client countries in the context of COVID. I really hope you enjoy the session, and thank you for joining us today. Attila, over to you.
Thank you very much, Martha. Most delighted to be moderating this session today, and even more so delighted to introduce our keynote speaker today, Wesley Spindler, who is Business Strategy and Sustainability Director at Accenture and co-author of the Circular Economy Handbook. Wesley.
Thank you so much, Attila, and thank you everyone for having me today. It's great to be here to kick off this event with a bit of an overarching view of the role that disruptive technology has to play in the circular economy before we get into the panel and discussion. So I will just spend a few minutes taking you through that view and hopefully fueling a lot of good inspiration and questions throughout the rest of the presentations. So firstly, to really understand why is technology important in the role of circular economy, I wanted to spend a moment covering off the foundations. How can we tap into the value of circular economy and transform waste from a challenge to an opportunity when we're looking across the value chain? So we at Accenture, we've actually defined what we refer to as 5 business models that cut across the whole value chain from design to end of use and act as a framework for transformation. So I'll just touch on each of these as it will come back when I talk about the technology view. So the first is looking at circular inputs. How do you use renewable sources or bio-based materials or man-made materials that are recycled or highly recyclable as an input into your value chain? A good example of this is to bring to life is Burio, which is a company that protects local marine flora and fauna in Chile by actually recycling abandoned fishing nets and using them as inputs into products such as baseball caps with their partner Patagonia. So it's thinking about recycled inputs into new products. There are then 3 business models that you can see on the right-hand side of the slide that cut across the full product life cycle. The first is product as a service. So that's where the business retains ownership of a product and sells the benefits through a service or subscription model. We then have product use extension. It's about extending product use through design considerations, repairs, or resale, for example. Next, we have sharing platforms. So sharing platforms is about increasing the utilization rate of products and assets through shared ownership, access, and usage. An example I love here is Hello Tractor, a company based out of Africa. They have a smart tractor sharing platform that connects tractor owners with farmers. This system links SMS messages requests with software that then identifies nearby tractors with the required usability and functionality and provides real-time information of the condition of tractor parts, which ultimately increases the usability life cycle. And then finally, at the tail end of the value chain, we have resource recovery. So that's about using the embedded materials or energy at the end of use of a product and recovering through collection, aggregation, and processing. So that's not on technologies per se, but just to set the scene on what are some of the models that technology needs to enable. If we can please move to the next slide. And through our analysis of over 1,500 case studies at Accenture in the circular economy space, we actually found that companies are embracing these circular business models, but to varying degrees of impact. So we therefore identify 5 enablers that we really feel are critical to the success of all business models. And that value chain transformation that I talked about. So design, looking at how you design a product or a service, or how you bring it back into the system. So looking at things like reverse logistics. But of all those 5 enablers, we really do believe that disruptive technology is the most important enabler in accelerating the move to circular and making it economically attractive. We can move to the next slide, please. And I've recently co-authored a book on the circular economy titled The Circular Economy Handbook. And in the book, what we do is we actually detail 27 that you can see here on the screen, 27 of the most instrumental technologies in their ability to enable circularity across 3 different categories. So when we think about technology, we think about digital, so things such as IoT, AI, and machine learning, but also physical technologies. So things such as robotics and 3D printing, and also biological technologies. So things such as bio-based materials and bioenergy. And I'm sure a lot of our upcoming speakers and panelists are going to mention some really interesting examples of this. And if we could move to the next slide, we also found that disruptive technologies, when used in combination, are even more powerful. So I love to call out quite a lot of examples in this space, but I want to highlight a few which really illustrate these inherently circular companies who deploy the combinatorial power of disruptive technologies in an innovative way. The first one to mention is AeroFarms, which is an urban farming company in the US. They actually use the combinatorial power of aeroponics, which is a biological technology, and predictive analytics, which is a digital technology to improve agricultural productivity. And the results are really, really impressive. Their methods require 95% less water than traditional methods, and they're 390 times more productive than traditional agriculture. So really interesting. The next, also on the food theme, is Winnow, that you can see on the middle of the slide here. They have a cloud-enabled food waste system that uses machine vision and data analytics to connect commercial kitchens to cloud software that allows users to record and analyze exactly what's being put in the bin. And by users, I mean chefs. And using this computer vision, the system harvests a large volume of food waste images, which are used to train a predictive model. And these artificial intelligence tools help chefs run more profitable and sustainable kitchens by cutting food waste in half. And for some customers, it delivers a 10% ROI, return on investment, in the first year. Really, really fascinating. And final one here is Banyan Nation, which is a technology-driven plastics recycling platform in India, which uses cloud and big data analytics within the informal sector to collect post-consumer plastics and then applying cleaning technology to restore the plastics to near virgin quality. And to date, just an example of one stat, they recycled over 500 tons of plastics and diverted over 1,000 tons of plastic from landfill. So those are three really good examples of how you can use the combinatorial power of technology to drive impressive results. And if we can move to the next slide as well, I wanted to call out, there's also some more emerging and accelerating technologies on the horizon that we really believe will support circular economy even further. So things such as digital twins and food tech. I love the digital twin example. We're seeing this more and more across industries and manufacturing. Water company Xylem, for example, they've developed a digital twin in the city of South Bend, Indiana, in their sewer system, and use AI to analyze and optimize stormwater surges to avoid combined sewer overflows and polluting local waterways. This has prevented more than 1 billion gallons of storm and sewage water from entering the river and helped the city reduce its construction budget by over $500 million. So quite a different example now, Appeal Sciences, really interesting. They use plant-based extract derived from discarded agricultural products to actually create invisible tasteless coating that extends the shelf life of fresh products by about 5 times for some product varieties. And it's a really great innovation that could be a game changer, and that's a great example of food technology. A lot of other cool examples here, but I won't go through them in the interest of time. So finally, just to cover off in a couple minutes, that's all really interesting, right? To see some of these great examples and all these disruptive technologies, but what needs to be done in order to make this change and this shift across business? And these innovations and these innovators have an important role to play, but effective circularity and technology implementation really does require widespread systematic change, and this requires industry leaders and pioneers to take responsibility for driving action. So we feel that leaders and pioneers really need to embrace technology and have a role in driving this holistic and systematic transformation in order to scale and impact some of these really interesting innovations. And they can do this through things such as looking at the circular imperatives around addressing resource efficiency across the value chain and within your own businesses. And in doing so, they can really lead the way, enable innovation, agility, and collaboration, which is needed to foster that wider value chain synergy, also unlock targeted investments, and influence smart policies, which will lead us towards a circular future. Really important that we don't just look at this as an individual task of single organizations or single people, but actually this concept needs, these circular disruptive technologies really need to be scaled across industry and amongst industries for real impact. So that's just a quick whistle-stop tour. I will now hand back over to Attila for the rest of the session, and I look forward to hearing more from the panel on the applications of technologies to enable circular business models. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wesley. Brilliant presentation. As provided by Wesley just now, we find 5 types of circular business models mapped across the value chain that focus on both production and consumption. One of the 5 key enablers to capture the potential of these circular business models are disruptive technologies, which enable the smart use of resources and create new opportunities. Today, in this first panel, we will learn of private sector use cases leveraging digital, physical, and biological technologies. We will now move through a quick round of introductions with 5 tech pioneers on how they apply technologies to enable circularity. Henrik, please unmute.
Yes, just 1 second. Sorry, yes. I should be unmuted. Is that right?
You are now unmuted.
Okay.
Please present.
And thank you very much, Attila. And as you can see on our slide here, I mean, our ambitions are high. We believe that the circular economy is important, and we believe that it should be accelerated. And like we see with other aspects of our society, then the best accelerator is digitalization. I mean, digitalization will be fundamental in the realization of the circular economy. What we also know is that a shared digital infrastructure will accelerate this digitization. Which means it's basically going to accelerate the accelerator. Most obvious examples which we've seen is the internet, Apple App Store, and a little longer back, also the telephone network. So it is our ambition to realize this digital backbone for the circular economy. We want it to be a global public good that must be politically, commercially, and competitively neutral. And as the circular economy is a value chain exercise, it's not an individual business challenges like the typical is within the linear economy. Interoperability by design is critical. The open software platform must be governed as a global public good. We will develop a toolbox with reusable digital components supporting the power of the crowds, which means that anyone across the globe can build applications on top and make them available on the application registry, just like you make a mobile app available on Apple's App Store. The required investment to participate is insignificant. It allows the small and medium enterprises and emerging markets to efficiently participate in the circular economy. Basically, I would say that a digital backbone is the only way to accelerate the realization of the circular economy for small and medium enterprises and the emerging markets. The governance structure will be similar to the internet. So no one person, company, organization, or government controls the circular economy internet. And as I mentioned previously, many companies has a myriad of up and downstream business partners, which means that interoperability by design is critical for an efficient circular economy. Building digital one-to-one connections is just not possible. The circular economy internet has 4 horizontal layers and 1 vertical layer. The blue cloud layer ensures immediate global availability. The green component layer is the toolbox where we realize reusable digital circular economy business models. As we do not expect we have all the answers, the components are extendable by industries and regions. The yellow application layer supports the power of the crowd, where innovators can use our reusable components to build their own applications. These applications are made available in an app store-like registry that is placed in the horizontal interoperability layer. together with other components needed for interoperability by design. I'm sorry, this is a little bit busy slides, but you're not expected to see it all, but it's basically some examples of what can go into the circular economy internet. We have the green boxes in the bottom, an example of reusable digital components supporting different circular economy business model. For example, we have the circular material passport and material pool that facilitates a circular material system where materials are reused in their existing quality by enabling a good business case for everyone involved. The red boxes on top are examples of extensions made by industries and regions. For example, the maritime sector's extensions to the circular material passport. And on top, you will find the active applications that allows companies to differentiate themselves and innovators to innovate while building on a shared, stable digital foundation. A quick example, again, perhaps a little bit busy, but it should give you an idea about how some of the circular economy business model will work. So we have the value chain of a white good, or simple value chain of a white good, and we illustrate here the how we're going to use the circular material pool and the circular material passport for white goods. The interoperability by design ensures that you can dynamically integrate the material description for any of your suppliers and also your subcontractors, etc. The generic circular material pool, it provides a complete overview of current and future availability of materials that are currently in use. And basically having a global interoperable material pool means that municipalities, regions, and countries can almost turn their entire stock of in-use materials into a competitive asset. Thank you. That was all my short introduction about what we're doing with the Circular Economy Internet.
Thank you very much, Henrik, and we will have a Q&A panel at the end. As our next presenter, I'd like to welcome Danny Go, CEO of Nexus Frontier, an AI company, representing also Professor Mark Esposito, who was not able to make it at this time. It's a last-minute situation arose. Danny, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Attila. Can you see my screen?
Brilliant. Yes, very well.
Thank you. We are a team of AI researchers spreading across Asia and Europe to make data machine usable, helping organizations to move fast and efficient through the data value chain so that humans can interact less and can serve their clients smarter at a near real-time processing. At the core of our belief, we believe that the business value chain lies on the connections between the data in each department. And the disconnectivity between the data is the one that is causing the disruption and the interruptions to the business processes today. And we believe by having AI, to utilize AI to identify, to extract, and to be able to streamline the data in this value chain, we'll be able to release the repetitive tasks of human beings and able to make it done by machines so that the data can actually serve across the business value chain in a near real-time process. At the same time, we'll actually allow the businesses, or so-called the experts in the business, to actually serve the consumer demand in a near real-time and allow them to actually take consumer feedback into the considerations when they design their new process, hence creating a circular business process along the business value chain. And the core of our belief is basically a framework called expert in the loop. And the core of it is simply to make AI systems to assist humans' repetitive tasks, whereas to allow humans to concentrate on correcting the small errors or the difficult errors, complicated errors, so that human beings can actually, or the expert can actually take the feedback to reinforce the system continuously, which allows the loop to be scalable and to be transparent along the process. And to go into a bit more details, it is a framework that we believe how to actually utilize the data allow the expert to lead the transformation process on an ongoing basis. If you look at the left part of the process, when AI can actually capture data, whether it's text, voice, graphics, videos, in a near real-time basis and able to turn it into usable data format, we can actually allow the experts, the business experts, whether it's an engineers or doctors or lawyers or any experts, to actually focus their time on a more important task to lead the change, whereas to allow the business process to process it in a much more seamless way and to allow a much more efficient delivery. And when you have more time, when an expert has more time to focus on the complicated issues, they'll actually be able to lead the process of the transformation, because they are the one who does the job on a daily basis and they know what is actually needed. At the same time, we'll actually be able to design to engage the consumer in this loop so that we can actually gather their feedback and reinforce the AI to provide a circular improvement and expansion towards the business process. And there are a few great examples in the case of healthcare industries, finance industries, government sectors, where they will actually be able to capture the data in a much more seamless process and able to bring this into a much livelihood expansions and scalable the process. I'm going to stop over here to pass on to the next speaker, and I'll explain the details and examples use cases in the middle. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Danny. Our next speaker is Tanya Horowitz, CEO of AMP Robotics.
Improve the economics of the recycling process. I myself have a background in robotics and AI, and around 2014 saw that many of these tools could solve some of the central challenges around the manual labor being used to sort out all these different commodity streams. Our central product are these sorting robots that can be installed with practically no retrofit into existing recycling facilities, and helps them automate, deal with the safety issues around this manual sorting, issues around COVID these days, and also improve the quality of these commodity streams. We have these systems deployed in Europe, North America, and Japan. The real power behind the technology is actually in the artificial intelligence, which allows us to identify all of these different commodities at sort of an arbitrary level of specificity. We can even identify these objects at the SKU level or by brand. We connect that vision system to this robotic sorter. But although the robots may seem like the most interesting piece, they're actually off-the-shelf robots already commonly used in manufacturing. It's really the inability to identify material, even though it may be smashed, folded, or dirty, that's prevented these robots from being used in the past. These systems are connected to one another and able to learn over time, improving the quality of the entire fleet. And there's over 100 of these robots sold all over the world. To give you a sense of what this identification problem looks like, we're looking at different resins of plastic, different types of metal, different types of paper, very specific items, things like coffee cups, those little coffee pods, and our robots all around the world are sorting out these different materials. So I think we play in this part of the value chain that's really around the reverse logistics and the ability to separate out these commodities from the waste stream. I'll stop there. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion and glad to be here.
Thank you very much for Tanya. Great stuff. Our next speaker is Matthew Silver, CEO of Cambrian Innovation.
All right, can you guys Hope you can see that. Thanks very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And thanks everyone for being on the line. At Cambrian, we're an environmental biotechnology company with a focus on reusing water and recovering energy from wastewater streams. So we're in the business of processing fundamental resources. And I wanted to first motivate the discussion with a quick example of our focus. I think a lot of folks know that environmentally, some of these major sectors like automotive or energy are a major source of CO2 pollution. The industrial sector, industrial manufacturing, is a huge part of the problem as well. Uses about 20% of the water globally, produces about 22% of the CO2 globally, and by concentration of water pollution, it's about 70%, depending on how you analyze it. And there's literally hundreds of thousands of plants out there. And so the flip side of that is that there's value in the wastewater streams that's being produced by industrial manufacturing. And so if you can recover that resource and use it on site, you've got a significant opportunity. A lot of people have looked at this opportunity in the past, and it's something folks have talked about in the context of what used to be called industrial ecology, what's now called circular economy. There are certain challenges to making that work effectively, and fundamentally, we're a commercial business, and at the end of the day, we understand that our customers are going to adopt our technology if the product that we're making, in this case, clean water and clean energy, is better than what they can get through substitutes. And that means, in this case, fundamentally, the dollar per kilowatt hour that we generate, or the dollar per gallon that we sell back. To date, that's been a challenge, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that there's not a lot of cost-effective solutions. That's the technical component. You need a system that can be distributed and installed and operated reliably at a high efficiency. There's a lack of competence in on-site operations. So even if you have a processing technology like this, you don't always have the competence at the manufacturing facility to operate a processing system that is fundamentally different than the core process of the manufacturing. And then you've got regulatory infrastructure and incentives that tend to favor centralized solutions. And finally, there's the cost of the substitute. And so, as the cost of energy or the availability of water changes, that's going to impact the relative advantage of adopting a circular approach to a waste stream like this. Our solution at Cambrian is to put together a couple pieces to make cheaper water and cheaper energy that also happens to be more sustainable. We've got a portfolio of biological treatment processes that enable very high efficiency recovery of biogas and clean water from wastewater streams. We've got a number of sensors and information generated by the biological system itself, which can lead to intelligent operations, which decreases downtime and decreases the labor needed to operate the plants. And finally, we've got a design approach to the plant, which is simple and modular and expandable, leading to a very low cost initial installation. Our business model is to make these available to folks as a product, but also as a service. And so to address that core competency issue, we're able to finance, install, operate these systems similar to a power purchase agreement in the solar industry. The impact of a system like this can be quite substantial. First of all, we're already operating systems that can produce water at an all-in cost that's a fraction of even the United States' current total cost of water on average. It's going to depend on each plant, but we're driving down costs pretty significantly. We've already generated or saved treated or saved over 2 billion gallons of water, and we've avoided over 1.5 gigawatt hours of energy, and that's due to a combination of factors associated with the advances of our technology as well as the distributed model for water processing. So I'll leave it at that. I look forward to the questions.
Super. Thank you very much, Matthew. Very informative indeed. As our final tech speaker, I'd like to invite to the screen Karsten Gerhardt.
So I hope this works. I'll trust you can see my screen. So Marta, Wesley, Attila, thank you very much for having me on this panel talking about Circular Valley, a hotspot for circular economy. It would be preaching to the converted if I not told you why we need to do this. So there is 100 billion tons of emissions out there into air, water, and land. And it has been accepted very widely by many stakeholder groups in society as the most pressing problem that we have worldwide. And there are good discussions about CO2, but not so much about the other emission streams. And interestingly, there is not a circular valley that is a spot where all the enthusiasts about the topic come together. We have a Silicon Valley that is for platform economy. We have Boston and San Francisco, which are doing biotechnology. London is fintech, Berlin is e-commerce, Tel Aviv is cybertech, but there is no one circular valley where corporates and startups and science all come together. And that is why we set out to look for a place that could be a circular valley. And we found it in the Rhine-Ruhr area in Central Europe. It is the area around Düsseldorf and Cologne in Germany. It's a metropolitan area of around about 10 million people, but the size is not what particularly matters. It is 5 very unique arguments which only come together here. And number one is you have access to companies in desperate need of solutions from all industries. Secondly, there is already a whole bunch of companies who are doing very well in circular economies. Number 3, very important argument from my point of view, it is the richest and most attractive science landscape in circularity that you can find between Sydney and San Francisco. Besides that, if you want to attract global talent, you have to be cosmopolitan and open. The region definitely is that. And the 5th argument, which is very important for investors from the East, it is a region that has a history. Now, very quickly going into the details, argument number 1, access to companies. There is over 300 companies headquartered from the producing industries, and that is ranging from A, like automotive, to Z, and you have all industries, all value chain steps, except for extraction. And it is the very big companies like a Henkel or ThyssenKrupp or Evonik, and then it is mid-sized companies like Vorwerk and Weiland, and then it goes down to 100, 200, 300 million companies, but they are selling their products all over the world. So you have all industries and all value chain steps represented here. It's not a deindustrialized area, because obviously in order to close cycles, to set up a circular economy, you need stuff. Second argument, there is a bunch of companies who are very active in the area of circularity. For example, Europe's largest recycler, 15 billion euro company, Remondis, is headquartered there, or the collection system Grüner Punkt. It was the first collection system worldwide established some 30 years ago. Plus there is additional circular companies from all industries who already reach out to developing countries all over the world. Argument number 3, I spoke about that, is the scientific landscape. You have over 24 universities, institutes, world-renowned institutes that very much focus on production technologies and recycling. So this is the largest density of universities you can find anywhere in the world, because when we speak about this region, it is a region where you can reach any point in less than 2 hours. So from the center to the outskirts of that circle, it is less than an hour. Argument number 4, obviously, if you want to attract global talent from Colombia, from Senegal, from Australia, you need to be very open and welcoming. This region is it. Düsseldorf has been a bridge point to Europe for many, many years, starting in the 1950s. So it's now 150 nationalities that you can find in that area. So from wherever you come, you will feel welcome here, and you will definitely like it. 5th argument, I mentioned this is the birthplace of industrialization. The first and the second industrial revolution on the European continent started here. If I say continent, that's because on the British island, Manchester was a little bit earlier, but as we all know, the British island is now deindustrialized, so you won't find a similar place there. It was water and coal that were the basis of the first and second industrial revolution. So if you wish, the genie was let out of the bottle here, the genie of the linear economy, and now it can be captured again. How do we want to go about this? Setting up the circular valley will first of all mean establishing a network node for sharing knowledge and content that is very much Wikipedia-like, and We are in close discussions and collaboration with Henrik and the circular internet, because that is exactly what we need. And then there are 3 additional pillars. One is the circular economy accelerator as a place where economy, science, and startups can collaborate. And then there is 2 additional pillars. One is public relations, because the idea of circularity needs to be brought out to the people, preferably by the means of art, we would say here. And the other pillar is policy recommendation, because lying directly on the axis between Berlin and Brussels as the 2 epicenters of circularity, Circular Valley is ideally situated, and it's even more close to Brussels than to Berlin. Where will it actually all start? It will start in this old refurbished gas tank. It has been a rotting monument until 2 years ago, then was refurbished. There is a house inside, a 4-story building, and on top of that, you have the largest 360-degree projection screen in Europe, and that is the ideal, most iconic place that you can imagine, and most authentic place for pitches of the circular economy. And with that, I thank you and hand it back to Attila.
Thank you, Carsten, very much indeed. It's a really great initiative to bring together circular technologists. I mean, today on the panel, we have 4, 5 of you with a tech background, but it's really brilliant to think that there will now be a home for hundreds, maybe thousands of circular technologists who will be connecting with other businesses as solution providers, but who will also be connecting with local, national, and global governments to spread and accelerate to spread the ideas of technology enabling circularity, with the ultimate goal of transitioning our linear model to a circular model. Going back to Henrik, what are the main applications of existing digital platforms for a circular economy, and which sectors do you see the growing demand for? In particular, if you can give an example on developing economies or emerging markets.
Yeah, but there's a couple of areas where we see digital platforms coming up. I mean, Wesley mentioned some business models, and I see the most obvious is the sharing economy, where we definitely have seen a lot of big players. I mean, Uber, Airbnb is the most obvious one, but also a few others. But in general, when we go beyond this sharing platform of those big digital giants, I think there's challenges about actually getting a business out of it for the big garden tools, etc. And I don't know about the tractors that Wesley was mentioning, but that is, at least we've seen some, as I said, we've seen some success in the sharing, but it's still difficult to kick it off at levels other than the car sharing stuff. Other areas, I mean, tracking is another example that is often called to be a circular economy application. I'm not sure that in itself is sufficient for the circular economy. Of course, you need to do some tracking of the materials, but I don't think that's necessarily sufficient. Where we also, that was one example of, I mean, the material pool, the circular material passport. This is also where we see some activities regarding the circular economy, meaning where the material passport is really a description about what is in the product, let's say washing machines, for example, but also how it's going to be disassembled. I mean, how are you going to repair it, and how do you make it up, keep it up to date during this 20 years lifetime. We've seen some examples of platforms trying to enabling this functionality of a circular material passport. The biggest challenge is I see there is something like the security, for example. Mean there is obvious confidential information about what goes into a washing machine, what goes into a car, etc. And not everyone is, and most companies is obviously not willing to share that information. This is also why we are on the circular economy internet is focusing very much on that it is the data owner that controls who has access to it. Another challenge we also see is the price tag. I've seen the price tags up to, for example, €100 for a circular material passport, and that is for obvious reason not not possible, not realistic. I mean, we are talking about, I said in my presentation that we are focusing on making this one affordable. So something like an average of 0.3 cents is probably more realistic. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. Anything more, Attila?
Yeah, no, that's very good. Thank you, Henrik. And I'm sure we'll have some questions from the audience as well, which we'll try to capture towards the end.
Yeah.
Danny, question to you. In the context of digitalization across supply chains, what are existing applications of AI in boosting industry competitiveness and circularity? Which sectors do you see the growing demand for?
At the moment, there are several sectors that have higher ROI, such as healthcare, finance industries, or even government services that has started to apply some of these AI technologies to basically boosting the competitiveness in the ability to finish the transaction in a much faster way. For example, facial recognition in finance industries. Several fintech has already started to apply the technology, but we started to see a lot more financial industries to apply these technologies in the due diligence, in the onboarding process, where it allows them to add on an additional layer of security to verify rather than just using a human being to identify whether is this person the same as the one on their ID. I can also see a lot of these technologies are currently applying on the healthcare industry, especially during the last couple of months, where the need of collaboration between different healthcare institutions, trying to collaborate, trying to share the information, trying to create something new to collaborate. It's the world's largest ever collaboration in the days that we can see. And the traditional way of information sharing and the ability to extract and understand the context of this information, for example, patient's report, for example, request for information or diagnosis of a patient, these clusters that has been preventing the information sharing across the platform, across digital healthcare trust, has always been the bottleneck. And by having the ability to extract and understand the data, such as chatbot application, digital onboarding applications, digital information sharing, the hospital trusts are able to share this information and able to complete that transaction in a much faster way. And the beauty of it is not only ends with the ability to share, but it's the ability to harvest the new data that has previously been difficult to gather. For example, facial recognition, or for example, involving the patients to actually engage them in the process, allowing them to share additional information, allowing them to share what their, for example, their symptoms are. And these will allow the designers of the system, or doctors in this case, to be able to take that into consideration in a much faster way. Same thing applies to financial industries. Facial recognition or even text recognition is actually adding on top of a layer of compliance, as well as solving that issues in real time. And same goes to the government services as well. I mean, we can see, especially in today's context, for example, I believe that people still remember Brexit in today's, it's coming up. All these change of border regulations, all this change of import and export regulations, the producing of necessarily new documents, new certificates, and all these things, it's no longer able to cope by the whole system. And simply, this is what we are seeing, that a lot of demand are actually coming from these sectors, that not only we require the hardware to put into this scalable solution that can take into users' feedback and that can expand and scale in real time, but also the core of it, like many panelists have mentioned just now, It's actually the ability to understand and the ability to harvest the new data that we can work across and we can scale together with the growing demand.
Very thorough answer indeed, Danny. Thank you so much. It's a complex question and a complex answer, but thank you. Matanya, Matthew, and Danny, please also chime in if you think. Could you tell us about any use cases in developing countries and what are the key challenges of deployment, be it internal or external, and perhaps some steps being taken to build a lasting and resilient business among some of the challenges being faced?
Sure, I can jump in. So I think again, what we're doing is in the area of distributed resource processing, and the opportunities, frankly, in developing countries are significantly higher than they are in the developed countries, because in the developed countries you're competing against an established centralized processing system. So in the United States, by way of example, there's central utilities for electricity and for water, and ultimately we've got to put in place systems that can compete against those directly. Whereas in the developing world, there's still an opportunity to shape policy and to shape sort of incentives to, if not favor distributed, at least putting it on an even playing field with centralized methods of generating some of these fundamental resources. So at a high level, similar to how solar is accelerating and how cell phones have enabled a leap in the developing world for infrastructure, there's an opportunity to do that for distributed processing. And then some specific use cases would be, we've got a plant operating in Malaysia, not entirely developing a country across the board, but in some cases it is, and in some ways it is. The challenges with operating in that kind of environment for a company like ours, as a growing sort of a growth company, is finding the right partners locally, is understanding how to do some of the non-core activities like what we call balance of plant design and installation, the things around our plant that need to be done correctly, construction, and then just navigating the local permitting and regulatory environment, which is often different along multiple levels, and even in developed countries is highly localized. So it's a question of know-how and knowledge and finding the right partners. The use cases and the economics can be tremendous. So there's a lot of opportunity there.
Thank you, Matthew. Very helpful indeed. But Tanya, from your point of view, and keeping in mind that with the bank, the idea is that there's a lot of opportunity in emerging economies. Indeed, so any specific use cases on how these technologies or these business models could be leveraged there and even brought to scale at speed?
Yeah, absolutely. At least for us here at Amp Robotics, when it comes to sort of the physical diversion of materials from the landfill, there's a very similar opportunity where you don't have as much infrastructure that's really been built up around landfills and incineration the way you do here in the United States and then in other parts of the Western world. And so it actually presents a really meaningful opportunity. So the goal of our technology is to reduce the costs of recycling, and by doing that, align incentives behind extracting these different commodities and diverting them from landfills. So we get quite excited about sort of kind of leapfrogging over this phase in developing countries and going directly to recycling a lot of these rapidly urbanizing population centers. The challenges for us end up being around not necessarily the recycling facilities themselves, but really around some of the other infrastructure that we assume is there for our existing customers here in the US, which is the existing of collection resources and then the existence of offtake for the materials that we're able to separate out, where a lot of those may not exist in developing nations. And the challenge with our business is that if you have to transport the materials too far, it's very easy to erode away the value. So we do think that there is a big opportunity where you're meaningfully using a lot of the same technology, and then you just sort of have to balance that with the rest of this circular economy value chain. Yeah.
Fantastic. And I don't know, Danny, if you want to add a minute or two from AI point of view.
Our experience has been slightly different. Again, as a disruptive technology, it is new everywhere. So the fundamental infrastructure requirement is rather the same, whether in a developed or developing countries. But a good facilitation for us is actually in some of the developing countries, like for example, in the Middle East, the regulator or the government's approach are rather more welcoming and opening, and to involve us into designing and creating the basic framework that allows us to apply the technologies. We've been working with a few financial regulators across the region, and the functionality of the financial regulators are rather very centralized compared to what we see in the developed countries, where the stock market and the regulators are rather distributed, and so that you can actually have a governing bodies to work. Rather, in developing countries, these newly built infrastructure are rather combined as one, so that it actually facilitates us to move across. Now, obviously, it is, in another case of developing countries, for example, in some of the countries that we see in South Asia, in Southeast Asia, it's rather even more difficult. So it rather comes in how ready the country is, how ready the regulator is willing to adopt this technology, and if they're willing to open, it's rather much more easier than the developed countries, where we have to integrate with the existing rules and regulations. But otherwise, it is actually much more easy. As you can see, the internet speed for example, internet speed in Dubai is a lot faster than right here in the UK, because simply you just need to apply, the cable, all the latest cable, or the newest cable in the country, rather than we have to slowly upgrade the cables from space to space.
Yeah, very good point, Danny. Like legacy systems and the roles of governments and regulators. Speaking of which, Carsten, you represent one of the biggest global organizations, Carney. When it comes to the application of these technologies, what role do you envision for government? And again, it's been mentioned by some of our colleagues here already. But what is the role that you particularly envision for governments, especially in emerging markets, in terms of optimizing the business ecosystem? In other words, enabling circular business models empowered by technology to thrive?
A good question, Attila. So when I think of governments, my first thought is provide security. So because if you talk to the Veolias or the Remondis or the waste managements in the US today, why they don't want to expand, it is simply for lack of security, investment security, and personal security also in those regions. I mean, obviously, if you look into the developing countries, there is an informal sector on a small scale that is doing all the reuse and recycle, very often under conditions that you don't want to have. And here, it would be the task of the government to enforce, to promote better technologies in the hardcore recycling process as such, because all the collection and sorting, that is pretty well taken care of simply by the fact that you have very cheap labor there, but you don't want to have the detrimental effects on the health in the later stages. So task in that small informal sector of the governments would be to enable the inflow of technology. And then you have the more organized gray sector that is very often simply characterized by corruption, and that is a stumbling block to larger companies entering those markets. And there it primarily would be to provide security of in all shades and forms, to bring in the already existing technologies that are all there. And our panel shows exactly that we have it all, but we need to get it to the very point of application.
Super. Thank you very much, Carsten. So as you might have noticed, audience, we've tried to go into very specific examples on technology, then come back out a little bit and look at policy and ecosystem enablers. But as this is a tech panel, I think we should come back a little bit to the specifics. Matthew, you founded Cambrian Innovation out of MIT in 2007. You've been doing a great job helping industrial producers capture clean energy and clean water from wastewater streams, as described. And really impressively treating 2 billion gallons of wastewater and generating 1.5 gigawatt hours of energy. This scaled up would be incredibly powerful, whether you do it or you and competitors, but I guess hopefully both. The big questions to you, and these are the business questions perhaps, about your main clients. How do you shift through consumer behavior towards reuse of product, i.e. the water, right? Which messages stick and which don't? What are the incentives for companies to work with you?
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Attila. I appreciate it. And at a high level, our customers are currently food and beverage manufacturers, resorts, residences, and those kinds of companies. And many of them are selling consumer products. And they're sources of input to their process, particularly if it's going to go into a product. So if it's, if you're making beer and you're and you're using water, it is very important to them. And it's in fact part of their brand. And so many of these kinds of companies have rightly been a little bit focused on or concerned with the quality of the inputs that they're using and hesitant to take up novel approaches to that. We are seeing a shift in that, a pretty significant shift in that. And there's a couple of things to be said there. The first is that a lot of these major companies have seen the writing on the wall when it comes to things like water scarcity in certain regions and in places where you have certain plants. And they've already put in place targets to cut their water to product ratio across the board. And they've been working on that over a period of years. They're hitting the edge of what can be done with just efficiency, which means using less in the plant itself. And the only step they can take to go further at this point is to reuse water. So there's a strategic imperative to start to do this. And the first step there is to find out where they can apply it within their processes that doesn't necessarily have contact with consumer products per se. And there are very simple things that can be done there. It's not rocket science. There's things like washing floors, cooling towers, irrigating lawns, things like that. So there's a tier of reuse that can be from the water perspective, or even from the electricity perspective, that can be to non-core sort of assets and targets. And then on the consumer side, more specifically to your point, you actually see that a lot of consumers would like to be purchasing from a company that has a significantly positive environmental impact. And we'll have some customers now who will put our logo on their packaging, for example, as an example of what they're doing for the environment. And we've done some events where we've used our water that we've produced and put it head to head with utility-based water, and shown that it can be certainly as clean and as effective and as reliable. So I think there's a shift with consumers as well, and it's just going to be a step towards getting there.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Matanya, same question to you. What are the incentives for recycling facilities, for example, or other clients that use your product?
Yeah, there's a key number that we really focus on, which is the sort of embodied value of a ton of material that'll go through a recycling facility. This exists in a commodity market, so it shifts, can shift week to week or quarter to quarter, but roughly a ton of material will be worth about $80 per ton. Unfortunately, the cost of running a conventional recycling facility ends up being about $90 a ton. So they're, barely breaking even. They may even be underwater on the core unit economics of the sorting process compared to the commodity value. They do have other sources of revenue, something called tip fees, but basically a fee for accepting material at the facility, and that'll make up the gap if their unit economics are negative. But a lot of this is driven by a heavy reliance on manual labor. So really, it's fairly straightforward for the facilities. They're trying to drive down this cost per ton of sorting, and our robots can do that significantly, bringing these costs down to something more like $65 per ton or even less. and then bringing them back to profitability purely based on the commodity value of these materials. So that creates a strong incentive, but just as important for these facilities is really consistency in their process. Unfortunately, the manual sorting process is fairly unpleasant. People put all sorts of things in their recycling stream that aren't supposed to be there, whether it's hypodermic needles, or every facility has a story about a grenade or this or that. And so, unfortunately, the facilities face high rates of turnover, which makes it hard to run a consistent business. So in turn, there's a strong incentive around just really being able to control their process, control consistency, and that proves out to be enough for our robots. But one of the things that excites us is that by reducing the cost of sorting, you make it viable to sort additional materials that may not have been worthwhile before. And so we've seen that in several facilities where they actually either increase the number of shifts they run, they increase the types of materials that they're willing to accept, things like this, which in turn allows them to divert more from the landfill, which is quite exciting.
Excellent, Matanya. A quick question from the audience. Matanya, is it possible to sort the different types of plastics?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a primary use case for us, is separating out number one plastics, number two plastics, polypropylene, and all these esoteric plastic or paper types that you not care about unless you're deeply embedded in that mechanical recycling part of the process. But the key for us is that the technology uses basically the branding, the form factor, the color of the materials. And so it's learned that, shiny, transparent plastic is number one plastic. If it has a Pepsi logo on it or something like that, then you can be very certain it's a number one plastic. And so we can actually go beyond resin numbers. We can go down to the SKU, or we could separate out by form factor, which in turn opens up interesting models for reuse. So for instance, there's several groups that have looked at reusable packaging rather than recyclable. Typically, this packaging has to be separated out from the conventional recycling stream and shipped back to the producer because of the difficulty of actually separating it out. But our robots can actually separate out. Say there's a group called Loop that's making aluminum reusable packaging, and we can actually separate those out at industrial volumes as well. So even beyond sort of specific resins, you can sort with potentially an arbitrary level of specificity.
Excellent. Super. Thank you for that clear answer. Next two questions, and this is to all of the whole panel, really. One, based on your entrepreneurial journeys, what paths do you see for the transfer of knowledge to stakeholders in emerging economies to deploy these technologies for circularity? And what are some of the key challenges that you might see, be it internal or external, and some steps that could be taken to build a lasting and resilient business amid these challenges, again, with a focus on emerging economies. And the next question will be, and we've touched on it, but I think maybe drilling in a little bit more, when it comes to the application of these technologies, what are the roles for governments, in particular in emerging markets, in terms of optimizing the ecosystem? As we've seen when Silicon Valley, technology went at light speed, and policy kind of followed very, very slowly. So I think that is that a trap that we might fall into again, or are we now able to get ahead of that? So in the order of appearance, Henrik, let's start with you, and then each of you, if you could just give your 2 cents on those two questions. So entrepreneurial journeys, paths for transfer of knowledge and capabilities in emerging economies, and then two, again, the roles of government with a bit more detail. Henrik, you're on mute. Henrik, you're on mute. Sorry.
I thought it was unmuted automatically. Sorry. Yeah. One of the challenges we see is the part of the regulation, meaning when you need to ship goods back in the reverse logistics, that can require, or that does require some changes regulations. Global supply chains are typical designed for pushing the goods out and not necessarily the whole return logistics. And that's also another example. If we talk about return logistics, another challenge that we're also seeing on the logistics, because traditionally logistics has been a challenge with the last mile. I mean, how to get the goods out to the consumers. But now with the circular economy, it is really about the first mile. I mean, how do you get the things from the consumer? How do you incentivize those one from the consumer until some kind of logistic point? And you probably need some, or in some cases you will need some governmental initiatives there to make it attractive for the consumer to start the return loop, instead of just throwing out your product as waste.
Yeah. Super, Henrik. Thank you. Just to stay on time, I would ask Danny, Matthew, Matanya, and Karsten to give a quick, 30-second answer to those same two questions.
Yeah, I'll chip in, which is I think there's a strong role for governments in emerging markets to capture externalities. And you've started to see this in European markets and others around extended producer responsibility schemes. But I think from our perspective in this sort of mechanical recycling world, anything that can capture those externalities really support what we're doing. We don't necessarily think there's a need for direct subsidies or things like that in at least our part of the circular economy. It's really around kind of information about externalities, and then trying to just have some market force that can capture that a little bit. We think that can be quite powerful.
Super, thanks for that. Danny?
On our experience involving the stakeholders, including the user as well as the regulator into the designing phase of the solution, is absolutely essential. Simply because the ability to use this disruptive technology is fundamentally different in terms of the processing, whether it's in parallel or in batch processing. Hence, involving the regulators, for example, the governments, in understanding the ability of this technology to be able to help, involving them into this designing loop and execution loop will help them to not only understand, but also as an approach to actually allowing them to get more involved into the expansion on the scalable of these solutions.
Thank you, Danny. Matthew, and then Karsten, please.
Yeah, I think with respect to avenues for getting knowledge out there, I mean, for us, almost everything we do relies on partnerships. And I mentioned that the highly local aspect of about 40 to 60% of the value that we generate or on site. And so it's a clear way for us. It would be identifying partners and working with them in local economies to implement solutions, and there would need to be a transfer of knowledge for that. With respect to governments, I want to echo what Matanya said about simply increasing the cost of, or not increasing the cost, but simply making folks aware of the impact of externalities. In our case, anything that can be done to favor a more distributed model versus a centralized model for resource processing is by definition going to favor circular approaches. And there's a number of policies that could be thought of around that, including national standards for quality around some of these materials that are being produced.
Fantastic. Thank you, Matthew. Karsten?
Well, I have a great privilege of living in a country, Germany, that has introduced collection schemes and gate fees already 30 years back. And you could see year by year with new gate fees and new deposit schemes, how more and more circles have been closed. So that is actually a best practice example which can be sent to other countries. And more on the private side, so won't come as a surprise if I say that a circular valley where you bring together people from the developing countries and the developed countries to work together on solutions is what I would strongly advise here. Yeah, this one place where everybody, whatever the boundary conditions are in the respective geography, come together to jointly develop new solutions.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, rather. With this, we come to the end of our first panel. It's actually the questions were actually meant to transition us right into the second panel. As mentioned in the opening remarks by Martha, it is important to acknowledge that the use of technologies and digitalization will not automatically lead to greater sustainability. There are associated risks, rebound effects, etc., and policy and regulatory measures need to be aligned with the sustainability slash circularity agenda. In the second panel, we have thought leaders from public sector with whom we will discuss existing and upcoming policy and regulatory measures and frameworks that aim to enable this transition. In this panel today, we have Matthew Stanislaus, Interim Director, Global Battery Alliance, World Economic Forum, Professor Giolos Demetriou, Director of Circular Economy Research Center in France, and Elisa Tonda, Head of Consumption and Production Unit, Resources and Market Branch Economy Division, United Nations Environment Program. Matti, if we could start with you, please.
Okay. Thanks everyone. I'm gonna give a brief overview of the Global Battery Alliance and its activities. There's a brief scan of its membership from public, from government, and civil society, academia. Let me focus on this a little bit. You know, the Global Battery Alliance has focused in on three major pillars. The one major pillar I'm going to focus on today is looking at circularity to drive towards the Paris Agreement, which could reduce greenhouse gases 30% in the transportation and power sector, and reducing its own manufacturing footprint by 50%. The key way that it is identified is to increase battery demand by realizing optimization of batteries through circularity and greater utilization. So these are the three principles, the 9 principles, one around a circular battery value chain, the second around a low carbon economy, and the third of ensuring that human rights and economic development are assured as we do the scale up. So here I've highlighted, this is an analytical study that we did with McKinsey that identifies the economic and CO2 abatement of interventions in key areas. I've highlighted renewables, repurposing, recycle, repair, and refurbishment. And the big takeaway here is that you can achieve CO2 abatement that is economically valuable if done correctly. And we've identified something called a battery passport to really drive this. Quickly touch on this. We believe the increase in demand is predicated on reducing the battery cost by 23% based on studies that we've done. And cumulatively, we believe 10%, at a minimum 10% of the cost reduction can be done through optimizing circular economy levers with a focus on reuse, second life, repair, refurbishment, and recycling. So we've settled on, as a flagship effort, something called a battery passport. The battery passport would enable the sharing of data, traceability of information and data across the battery value chain to realize a number of achievements. And one is data to enable safe repurposing and reuse, optimizing recycling. This would involve access to key data, battery health data, safety data, tied to a battery identity. And this would be linked with ensuring that a chain of custody is assured to ensure that there are no sourcing of materials using child labor in violation of human rights. So at its heart, the battery passport is an assurance platform. It was set forth basically a standardization and rules that is aligned between the public, government, civil society, and private sector, establishing a mechanism for data evaluation and integrity, and benchmarking, and certain levels of transparency based on the kind of user in the value chain, government, and public sector. So this is just one example of our ongoing conversation with the European Union Commission to ensure that the GBA battery passport embeds and is aligned with the European Union rules in terms of battery responsibility and sustainability. And the goal ultimately is to have the battery passport be accepted as a mechanism of assurance by and via the European Union rules. Related, I'll talk a little bit about our efforts in the developing world. This is an effort around linking second-use batteries, EV batteries, but ensuring that the back-end systems are in place. So this is an effort that we have partnership with the World Bank, Faraday Institute, and just about begun this effort. And the key aspect is to build a roadmap, working with local stakeholders in Africa to drive the energy access, which would provide the health improvements, the economic benefits associated with energy access, clean energy access, but ensuring that the end-of-life management is in place. So we'll be exploring traceability systems of batteries, either within Africa or into Africa and outside of Africa, but also ensuring the end-of-life management systems, recycling systems are in place. And the last thing that I will mention is the critical role of ensuring that the lessons of circularity of lead acid battery management that results in a 99% safe recycling in Europe and North America is achieved in emerging markets. And just to highlight the quote from a recent study issued by UNICEF in partnership with Pure Earth. That is one in 3 children globally are poisoned in violation of WHO standards. This results in significant not only health concerns, but also significant GDP effects in emerging markets. So we're working on best practices to enable and drive a closed loop recycling in emerging markets. And I will, I guess I won't touch this, but I'll give a brief scan of the work and I'll look forward to questions.
Thank you very much, Matty. Very informative indeed. And you've mentioned the European Commission a couple of times. Well, we're fortunate to have Yorgos today with us, who's thoroughly looked into this and is actively involved with the European frameworks. Yorgos, can you talk a little bit about existing governance and regulatory frameworks in place to enable the transition to digital circularity with the focus on application of traceability and data? And we've heard Matty give an example, but are there other specific examples of success you have in mind?
I mean, definitely. Just to check that you can hear me, you can see the presentation.
Yes, we can hear you and see the presentation.
Perfect. So indeed, I'm very happy that all the presentations are really complementary between them, and definitely Karsten has convinced me to visit the emerging Silicon Valley of circular economy in Germany. But what I would like to say is that a little bit from the policy perspective, because we need to also understand a little bit from a European perspective how things work. And this is a little bit my presentation. It's also a little bit provocative, just to show a little bit the debate is that we should look a little bit at policy and education, the sunk cost for this transition, because definitely some of the colleagues mentioned before, circular economy is about supply chain or a business model, etc., which definitely we are looking at that. So what is the aspiration at the EU level? So the aspiration at the top of the leadership is that EU should become a world leader in circular economy and clean technologies. So definitely now you would say, how is this going to happen? I mean, how are we going to do it? there's a lot of sunk costs related to that. So EU started already with the circular economy action plan 2015, and now we have the action plan of 2020 and the European Green Deal. So effectively, this brought to the forefront the initiation of the transition, which, of course, in Europe, a lot of things can happen a little bit top down. So in this way, already in 2018 and 2020, the European Commission mobilized about 2.5 billion euros in the support of the high risk markets of the future. So because you see a lot of technologies and innovation, so all these kind of things create a sort of uncertainty as well. And Europe has not, showed this culture vis-a-vis, for example, the US, which is a little bit more daring. So what you see here already from the work program 2018-2020, the EU has already mobilized 3.3 billion euros in low carbon, circular economy 1 billion, and digitizing and transforming the European industry and services 1.7 billion, which is subject of our discussion today. However, in the context of the Green Deal, this is a little bit the items that are included, but I'm not going to ask you to focus on any of these green ones. I will ask you to focus on the blue one, financing the transition, because this is what's very important at least at the EU level, how we will be able to finance the transition, given that there is a lot of sunk cost included. And it's not just the technologies, it's also the transition of the civil sector, as we said, regulations before, and a number of other things. So traditionally, EU has been working through the programs, and now we have the framework programs. We had so far 9. The Horizon Europe is the 9th one, and EU has been investing a considerable amount of money in this kind of new things. And the Green Deal, I think, is one of the biggest ones that we are having, with 100 billion euros in investment. But then the question is, how is this going to be channeled? So the European Union has already launched a report accelerating the transition to the circular economy and improving access to finance for the circular economy projects. And this May, the European Investment Bank that did the same. They launched a guide. And I'm also part of the expert group that drafted the report for the European Commission. And there were a number of recommendations for financial institutions, project promoters, and policymakers. So I'm not going to go through all the recommendations. The report is publicly available. We can go. I think it's a good read. But I would just mention, for example, the self-evident circular economy project definition, taxonomy, and measurements. So we need to have a baseline of what we're talking about. And this is for the financial institutions. For the project promoters, is also another of important elements to be able to establish collaborative arrangements across different organizations within and between the value chains. This is what we discussed earlier, and other colleagues have said it, and I'm really happy that has been mentioned. And of course, for policymakers, is linear risk disclosure standards, the definition of the circular economy finance. So there are a lot of things that is going to be happening in the next period. Now, just to see a little bit how the policy is going more into that, you will see in the framework program, which will be launched, that there's a separate chapter, the 4.2a, they will see at the bottom of the screen, on circular industries. And the Europe and the aspiration that Europe is becoming a leading to that. So you see already that we haven't been so vocal and vivid before, but now the EU is becoming quite vivid and solid on that. To see that how this is strengthening more with the topic of the discussion today, the EU in February this year, they launched a white paper on artificial intelligence and the European approach. And again, they are linking the circular economy with a number of sectors. So Danny mentioned before healthcare, you see it's already in the vision. And what's very important as well, the European Union has issued the Shaping Europe's Digital Future on which was in February. So what is our aspirations ahead of us? And again, circular economy and digital developments are highly linked the way forward. Now, the one important thing, which is skills and education, I know that we're having this part of the discussion in a while, Tila, but this is part of the presentation. I'll just go through it. What is very important to see here is that every a few years, the European Union, when they have a new program, they launch the skills agenda. This skills agenda is very unique because the title is Sustainable and Competitiveness, Social Fairness and Resilience. And this is to show how serious they are on the twinning between the green and digital transition, and how the digital skills gap has created a small issue, and we need to really work into that direction. And the fact that vocational programs, they need to be tailored to the twin green and digital transition. So we need to start preparing the people. So it's not just producing products, business models, etc., etc. We need to be able to fuse it into the people, and this is what we need to do, and how we're going to do it by awareness, training, and education. So this is something which is very critical, at least at the EU level, and you can see it as well. Last phrase that the aspiration from Europe to become climate neutral continent is whether we have an informed population and workforce that understands how to think and act green. So two last things. This is the Circular Economy Research Center that I'm the director of. I agree with some of the colleagues before about whether the business circular economy is a supply chain issue, it's a business model, which I think we agree with most of them. And also in our occasion, we totally believe that the technological advancements and the skills development will be the two factors that they will exponentially help to expedite transition. And 10 seconds to show you one last slide. This is one of our projects that we receive funding at the EU, which the circular economy in the Internet of Things, just to tell you that we are not just on the theoretical, we are also on the application level, in order to see the value creation between and the merging between the value drivers between the two domains. And we have received quite a subsidy to develop the framework between the two domains. And again, I agree with Karsten, you have to do this with, you're not alone. It's all about partnerships. So these are part of the partners that we are working together in this period. And we're trying to create this fusion of networks and policies as together, as well as our partners from industries and academia as well. So with that, I'll just pass back to you, Attila, and apologies if I took 2 minutes more than expected.
No, that's fantastic. That's exactly what we were hoping to hear. I mean, circularity has been such a European agenda for such a long time, and the idea is how do we take all of this knowledge and experience and network and technology to the rest of the world, in particular to emerging economies, where we've heard from the previous panel there's so much opportunity. So I'll pause there, and maybe towards the end we come back with some questions. But it would be good to understand, what are the existing or more specific EU initiatives that are empowering citizens with information and skills. Yorgos, if you can maybe take 30 seconds on that. And then Matthew, I'm curious to hear more from you on how the alliance members are coordinating strategies and technologies to achieve joint and common CE targets. So Yorgos, the question back to you, and then to Matthew.
Thanks, Attila. Quickly, I would just to say that all this investment at the EU level to the research has enabled industries and academia to come together and start developing knowledge. And what we see, and that's very positive, is that the number of entities are creating knowledge around what they do, and they start sharing best practices. And the last thing is that there is the aspiration from the EU to create the EU Global Alliance, which will include national roadmaps for implementation for circular economy, which includes education and skills. So we will be seeing that coming formally as well in the education systems of the EU member states, at least.
Fantastic, Yorgos. Thank you. Matthew?
So in terms of your question, how we align among GBA members, I should first say that especially among some of the midstream manufacturers, what they all told us is that the critical importance of independent verification of information that currently the markets, civil society do not trust. So that leads to the need for a common standard of greenhouse gas verification or sourcing of materials or data. So that's the first step of alignment across the GBA membership. The other, which is still to be determined, is how would the battery passport be interoperable with existing systems. So there are numerous digital systems of traceability. There are in-company systems. So, this is an effort that's going to pick up next year, is establishing the governance rules for interoperability, where you have access to data, but also ensuring protection of data is assured and that the rules for a permission basis is established. So that is something that's still to be determined early next year.
Thank you, Matty. Very clear and makes a ton of sense. So in addition to governance, regulatory frameworks, a favorable investment climate is needed, providing economic and behavioral incentives for a digital transition to a digital circular economy. Elisa, substantial financial resources are needed and structural change in production and consumption alongside technology change to enhance economic efficiency and to optimize the use of financial capital. Could you tell us about national and regional policy-led initiatives for circularity in emerging economies and developing countries?
Thank you, Attila, and I'll really be pleased to take advantage of this question to somehow share a bit of a preview of an assessment that we did globally as a response to a UN Environment Assembly request brought forward to UNEP in 2019 to really get a sense of what was the current status of integrated and coherent policies that help promote sustainability and circularity across value chains. And I'll probably stress the word integrated and coherent because as per what was described across all actors of supply and value chains, the same is required within the government to really push towards this transformation. And what we captured in terms of feedback and elements that had been tabled so far in relation to circularity and specific value chains and products, we're very much in the realm of more sectoral siloed approaches or very specific instruments. And only in 14% of the policies instrument that we had collected in this exercise, we were able to identify this coherent and overarching approach to push forward circularity. And that was frequently really embedded at the highest level of the government in the context of development policies brought forward by the entire government. And therefore, what we saw that this integration of policies with the life cycle of the product in mind still remain a bit of a rare situation. And let me flag another element that might be particularly interesting also for this conversation, which is the fact that we also realize that the monitoring of the impact of those policies is not necessarily well known and not necessarily tracked in a consistent way, which is also something where our digital conversation could be helping a lot advancing. We saw that in a lot of instances, what was understood as instruments brought forward for circularity were very much focusing on end-of-life treatment, on solid waste reduction, on recycling. And we somehow saw that there was too little attention to upstream type of solutions that were looking more into the design of product and therefore transforming upfront that whole system that was described in the course of the earlier presentation. But let me just give a bit of a flavor of what we had captured of that picture around the world. When looking at African countries and Latin American countries, we really saw a lot of the front runners in bringing forward that idea of a government-wide circular economy approach. Particularly, we had seen that in the context of Latin America in countries such as Chile and Colombia. And I would say, not surprisingly, these are also the countries who have been stepping forward into creating, with the support of our organization, but also other strategic partners, a regional coalition for Latin America and the Caribbean again, with the idea of trying to share those approaches and understanding that for what we are discussing today, the boundaries of the countries are not necessarily the boundaries of the value chains that we're trying to make circular. So that integration and that regional discussion is definitely very conducive to create that system-wide transformation that we want to achieve. In a somehow similar approach, also in Africa, we have seen a number of leading countries such as South Africa, Rwanda, and Nigeria taking forward the agenda at the highest level of circularity. And in that instance as well, we have seen a few years back the establishment of the African Circular Economy Alliance under the lead of those three governments, with the engagement of UNEP since the beginning, an alliance which now is being supported by the African Development Bank in its flourishing. And if we're looking at the situation that we have been capturing while looking across the Asian countries, we have seen across countries a very strong tradition of having had policies that were focusing on resource efficiency, on clean technologies, on reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and in few instances with a connection to the market through public procurement and green public procurement policies. And only more recently, we're starting to see more integrated circular economy type of instruments, and countries that have made already this step include obviously China, as well as Japan, Korea, Thailand, and Vietnam. And a couple of countries are in the process of getting those overarching policies in place, and these are Laos and India. So Attila, as you see, it's quite an active context and landscape, somehow with different entry point based on the tradition and the experience that the countries have had in promoting agendas such as the one of resource efficiency and sustainable consumption and production.
Thank you, Elisa. Thank you very much for that. Great to have the global perspective and also the global South perspective. Could you tell us any, well, linking to empowering individuals with information and skills mentioned by Yorgos before, can we shift government consumer behavioral? To give a bit context, several digital and physical tagging solutions have been designed to promote behavioral change, which we know can contribute to more circular economy. Could enhanced traceability improve the financial due diligence of companies, perhaps making use of tracking and tracing techniques for materials? Do you see an opportunity there?
And I'll start responding to this question by somehow framing also as an organization, as UNEP. We're seeing the role of the digital transformation going forward. We actually do see digital technologies and mobile applications as a way to really accelerate our capacity to shift towards more sustainable consumption and production solutions, and therefore address the three big planetary crises that as an organization we have at the center of our strategies, which are the climate crisis, the nature loss crisis, and the pollution and waste crisis. And we somehow see two big areas where we can see that transformation materialize. One area is very much related to being able to collect and act upon environmental data. And that's why Attila made reference to the idea of monitoring. So it's really important for us to know what the impact of our action is towards creating that circularity. And in this sense, I think that the conversation that we're having today can really play a fundamental role for us to set a baseline and to help us progress towards a milestone that make us more and more circular in the way in which we operate. And on a second area of intervention, really help us accelerate the transformation that we need in markets in value chains, in consumers' behavior, and in decision making. And definitely a strategically important role to be played by aligning finance with that transformation, with that shift towards circularity, being sure that we can understand and monitor supply and value chains, as well as inform and engage consumers. And maybe, Attila, just to be clear from the beginning, when I'm referring to consumer, I also frequently put together in the category of consumer a relatively important consumer in a number of markets, which is the government, that through its public purchasing power can influence from 20% of an equivalent of 20% of the GDP in OECD countries until more than 30% of the GDP in a number of developing countries. And there, what we really have experienced through a number of our initiatives on the ground is really that taking advantage of digital innovation and taking advantage of the new business models that can be shaped around it, it really changes the relationship between what we would have in the group of consumers and in the group of producers. There are very interesting initiatives around the world, similar to the one put forward from Algramo, that through a smart type of packaging has really been recreated the relationship between the consumer and the brand and the product that it's taking advantage of. But they are also somehow building on that relationship of knowledge and trust that was referred to in earlier intervention, just creating more transparency on the products that are there in the market. And for example, with the government of Chile, we have been developing a platform that goes under the wording of Mi Código Verde. And through that platform, consumers are really able to see what are the environmental impacts of high consumption products that are there in the market. And this obviously has a very close connection to how a consumer, as important as the government, can shape and orient the market towards more sustainable solution. We've also gone a little bit more in depth into seeing how a specific digital solution can help accelerate the shift towards positive environmental impact. So we've been looking into what are the impact of digital platforms that enable to extend the product lifetime of certain categories of product or enable certain products to remain in the market for longer. And in 1 year of operation across 10 of these platforms, we have seen that there has been a reduction on GHG emission around 20 million tons and a reduction of use of plastic for packaging around 1.1 million tons. So these are what we want to try and nurture and capture as the power of digital technology to accelerate change. In other contexts, such as in a small island developing state like St. Lucia, where the tourism sector was particularly reliant on the import of product, we actually managed to shift that balance and increase the purchase of local product, thereby enabling the reduction of GHG emission of imported product, just by connecting the users of this product with, particularly with local farmers who would normally not have had access to big consumers of product through a very simple digital solution. And on top of the reduction of GHG emissions, we've also reduced by 15% food waste produced in the country. So it, as said, it really changes the dynamics between producers and consumers when designed to fit the vision of circularity as well as a vision of reducing our climate impact.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Elisa. Really, really thorough feedback. I'll freestyle a little bit here because I think I saw Matthew on mute. Matthew, was there something you wanted to add or support or challenge?
I will add that just to reinforce Elisa's comments, from our consultation with the GBA members, traceability has influence at multiple levels. So some of the largest EV manufacturers have told us that their institutional investors are demanding, independent traceability and authentication. So the investors are no longer saying, trust our sustainability report. They want data, they want direct data, they want authentication. But authentication and traceability is also important, to Lisa's point, between upstream and downstream suppliers, right? So the downstream companies are, and rightfully so, are being challenged by civil society to demonstrate that there's no greenwashing going on, greenhouse gas claims are authenticated. So you have now the close to real-time data to drive procurement in a way we've never had before. Between the cheapness of data, the immutability of data, the ability to use, whether it's cloud-based data or blockchain-based data, dispersed ledgers, to be able to drive procurement authentication in a way we've never had before. Lastly, and I think there's still going to be further iteration on behavioral economics and the linkage with digital technology. How do we get that right? So we are working on a label, a battery label that would differentiate the highest performance batteries to the middle performing batteries. And what we've heard from the leading actors in the near term, it will mostly drive the poorer performers in the supply chain. Right, and then the consumer choice will pick up. So there's a whole big debate around which will drive first. Is it the highest performers and the financial sector putting pressure on poorer performers, and then the consumer choice will kick in? So I think it probably varies based on sector. So I'll stop there. So.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much, Matthew, Georgios, and Elisa. I would now invite the whole panel to a short Q&A portion of this webinar. We've received questions from the audience, and quite a few. So we'll just do our best to select as many as we can in the short amount of time that we have. But let's start with the biggest one, and this is a recurring question. Where do we see the role of the bank, the World Bank? So Elisa, maybe we can start with you because you've mentioned finance and you've covered finance. Where do you see the role for the World Bank?
I guess I see it in a number of opportunities, and definitely there is something within the economic and the financial framework that exists in country that is, to a certain extent, still supporting a linear model. So while working with counterparts that World Bank normally has in the government, there's a huge potential to transform the circular into the normal and the most convenient and economic solution for everybody by disincentivizing linear solution and incentivizing circular ones. And obviously also thinking through the infrastructure that would be required for the circular world that we want. So when supporting the creation or the strengthening of infrastructure that exists in country, it would be ideal if this could be designed and thought through, having in mind the transition towards circularity that we want countries to take forward.
Thank you very much for that, Elisa. Another question from the audience, and I think Yorgo or Karsten, maybe jointly you can address this. Europe seems to be making remarkable progress whilst advancing the quest to going circular. For developing countries, what could be the cost of this transition and inaction to circularity? Yorgo, do you want to take a stab at it, and Karsten maybe supplement?
Sure. I mean, I think that there's a cost in whatever we do, but I think that what is happening now, at least from an EU perspective, there is a good strengthening of collaboration abroad. For example, there's the EU-India collaboration that has been signed in order for exactly this, to achieve this fusion. And also, Karsten mentioned it before, we have to collaborate between developed countries and etc. So I think that the more there is a fusion between actually what is done in the developed world and what is done with what Elisa has very accurately mentioned, the more fusion that there is exists, I think that there's the less cost to be transferred. And actually, there is more of an opportunity to be transferred to the less developed world, especially when we're talking about facilities or technologies that could definitely enable transition in the less developed parts of the world. So I think that what I would say is that the let's say the pioneering of the EU could be a huge opportunity for the rest of the world, also because EU is also contributing and aligning itself with the Sustainable Development Goals, United Nations. So there is a lot of fusion of benefits there as well. So I think that is less of a cost rather than opportunity to be transferred.
I couldn't agree more, and fully love Giorgio's ideas. So, I mean, what we've seen in the past in terms of North-South collaboration is typically that some stuff produced in the South was transferred to the North and sold at higher prices. So that is a model that has been well learned in the past, and now this would really be the next step to more set up an economy, and in this case a circular economy in the very developed nations. So I think this is a great opportunity of taking collaboration between corporates in the north and startups in the south or developed nations to the next level.
And thank you for those answers. And speaking of North-South cooperation, Elisa, you also mentioned there was work being done in Chile. We have a question from the audience, and I mentioned Chile because of in relation to the question. The mining industry is perhaps lagging somewhat in working towards a circular economy. What do you see as the priority areas to ensure this industry has the most positive attempt at becoming more circular?
Thank you, Attila. I think that this industry is one that probably knows the resources and the opportunity around resources the best compared with many other actors around the value chain. So their knowledge and insight of the opportunity for circularity is definitely a great asset that would benefit the rest of the system. And when seeing it from a country's perspective on top of sectoral perspective, what would definitely be a plus going forward to make sure that this industry is somehow not left behind in a transformation that eventually circles resources more and more into the system is really to think of solution that enables that industry to diversify itself and progressively add value to the resources in such a way that they become therefore an integral element of the closed system that we're generating. Definitely that might require what Georgios was referring to, a change or an upgrade in skills and in knowledge and diversifying expertise. But there is such a solid base in that industry of knowledge, of opportunities around resources, that they are definitely well positioned to do that step into a circular system.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much, Elisa. Very good point. I mean, we've seen the energy sector where petrochemical companies, oil companies have diversified into clean energy. We've seen waste management companies becoming cleaning companies for reusable packaging. So that's a very good point. That indeed, circularity is not necessarily going to be something that could be foreseen as a challenger to extraction, but rather as complementary to extraction. And who better positioned to do that than the extractors themselves? The only question is, are you extracting from what's already in the economy or raw resources? Or do you find a balance between the two? But obviously optimizing circularity, which is what we're all striving for in this space. So what we've heard today is that the technology is there. It's being applied. It's being applied differently in different places, but there's definitely opportunity for scale. Scale will require intervention from policy and regulation, and the sooner the better. And last but not least, and very, very importantly, financing. And as our kind host today, the World Bank, our experts on this piece, I would just invite Etienne Kishinian to maybe answer that question, but also to wrap us up for today, and give us a bit of look into the future, what's next from the bank.
Thank you so much, Attila, and thank you so much for hosting an excellent session, for everyone for joining this late. We had some very good discussions. So the digital agenda or technology agenda in circular economy is very dynamic. It's a horizontal theme that is kind of allowing the circular economy to thrive, or to, in a way, it's a gel that allows it to move forward a lot more rapidly than it has in the past. That's why, as Matthew mentioned, the role of information and data is so critical in this space, because it allows us to monitor and to react quicker to things in the supply chain. So for us at the bank, the circular economy space is relatively new. We have a number of initiatives that are up and coming, as Martha mentioned in the beginning. We have the Disruptive Technologies for Development initiative ongoing, which is trying to identify some of the disruptive technologies that are enabling circular economy. We also have a trust fund that is being developed called ProClean, where we are infusing, let's say, bank operations with circular economy practices. As Elisa has mentioned, we need to start thinking about circular economy from the infrastructure perspective, from the real sector perspective, and in other sectors at the bank. But the way things work is demand comes from the client, of course, and we are here trying to push, let's say, or at least show the client that there's another way to think about this. And a lot of what we discussed is fairly new, and to the policymaker, they are still a bit skeptical about the circular economy. So having a very strong evidence base that this is a new way of development at a grand scale, not at a sort of a small scale, but something that can really transform industries, is still relatively nascent, and we're trying to figure out how to measure that best, how to analyze that best, and how to tell the story to the client in a different way. I think the digital agenda in post-COVID is also going to be extremely strong, and this gives us an opportunity, because digitalization is linked to circular economy. Using that as a platform to drive development in our client countries is going to be critical, and infusing the circular economy into that is going to be one of the key drivers. So, so to say that the agenda is fairly new, we're through this learning series, we're trying to understand better how to tackle these issues. This is the fourth in our series, and you had mentioned critical minerals. Actually, I was just going to mention that December 9th, we will have the session on critical minerals hosted jointly with the European Union, and we welcome everyone to participate into that. And there we will definitely touch upon things that Matthew was mentioning as well, in terms of the integration of recycling of batteries and other minerals in the supply chains. Again, some of the key takeaways for me, at least in this series, is the importance of the informal sector, and how can the digital economy bring those into the, not into the formal, but into the circular economy, and how to make sure that they are also benefiting from some of these actions. The notion of security, providing investors with a sense of security, both in terms of the platform, but also in personal security, is very critical in post-COVID. And just in general, providing a policy space for digital platforms to flourish. I don't think we touched upon, let's say, the technical aspects of that, but digital economies themselves do require certain regulations to be in place, and understanding what that is and how our countries can enable that is still a bit of a, let's say, question mark that we'll try to figure out as we move forward with this agenda. So just to close it here, I want to thank everyone again for joining us. We have 8 more sessions left in this learning series, and we really hope that you can join us on this journey of understanding this topic better and making sure we're able to scale it to the maximum in the areas where we work. So thank you, everyone, and have a nice day.